Welcome to Cigar Keep. Over the next few months, we plan to provide you with some terrific content that is both educational and entertaining, but we are starting with something slightly special. We have an interview with the great author, journalist, and all-knowing Nick Foulkes. Nick is somebody who I have had the great privilege of knowing for a very long time through both work and also through friendship. Most of the time, he is the man asking the questions, and we've known from his terrific videos with his son Max that he always has a terrific story to tell, but he's never really had somebody to help him dig a little deeper. So hopefully we get to do that today. Nick, I'm delighted you're here, but I sort of feel like I have to declare an interest, as we've known each other a very long time. So the idea of me doing any kind of interview with you is a slightly odd thing, because for many years now, and a lot of people don't know this, you have dedicated quite a lot of time to my personal education and my growth within the industry and where I am now, which, you know, in the lofty heights of Cigar Keep is quite an achievement. You must feel. I mean, I imagine you're sitting here rather chuffed.
Delighted that you've achieved such eminence, yes.
At long last.
No, it didn't take you long at all. Your rise has been meteoric.
But it's exciting for me to be able to talk to you about Cigar Keep and cigars, because when it was, I think, 2014, you sent me to Davidoff. This is when we were working together at Finch's Quarterly Review, which is a much missed publication.
It is a much missed. When was that? It was before 2014, I think I sent you, wasn't it?
So, no, of course you're right, actually. Sorry, 2014 is when I started the race. It was more like 2012. And I was speaking to you and I said that I'm interested in learning more about cigars. You know, what do I do? And you said, go and speak to Eddie or Edward Sahakian at Davidoff. Say that I sent you. And so off I went. And I spoke to Eddie, who was there, and there was a Cuban cigar roller, a roller over from Cuba, who was doing hand rolls. And Eddie took me over the road to Franco's, and basically took me through cutting it, lighting it, and what I'm meant to taste, and the rest is history. And so I guess really you're responsible for my bad habits, or my good bad habits. As I think I mentioned in my wedding speech, actually.
Yes, I think you might have done. I mean, you want to lay a lot of the blame at my door.
I try my best always to pass the buck.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that you're.
It's that sort of wonderful thing that managers do. They say, they make it perfectly clear that it wasn't their fault, but the buck stops with me. And
exactly.
And then they fire the person. They fire the person concerned.
I take full responsibility, and the responsibility is to sack the person responsible. So, but with that in mind, could you tell me what your equivalent story is with regards to cigars? Because with the amazing series that you've done with Max, we know that you took Max to Davidoff as a young child and stuff, but I don't think we really know where it all started for you.
It started, I think, when I was probably either just before or just after I got married. My wife's stepfather introduced me to cigars on the sense of, he described the sense of well-being that they conveyed, which for a sin product is quite amusing, I find. And that was it. I mean, I sort of accelerated my interest in cigars because I stopped drinking. And I was in the wine trade for a few years, and I did my wine exams. And I was able to transfer what, if you could unkindly call it, all my snobbery about an agricultural product to which mankind adds value, from that to cigars. And it was a revelation, because you can apply the things of terroir, varieties, maturation. I mean, it's an analogous, or whatever the pronunciation is, I always forget, situation there you have with wine, with cigars. I mean, and not just that they tend to be enjoyed in conjunction and have this, to my mind, which I like what you do with Cigar Keep, to my mind, unnecessarily elitist badge attached to them. Because, I mean, they are a product. If you actually take the time to look a little further behind it, you do then access an entire culture, an entire world, an entire history. And that, for me, is as much a part of it as the sort of degustory pleasure of actually setting fire to the thing and allowing the smoke to dance across the palate, you know.
Yeah, so it could be argued that your shtick over the years is to find interests that a lot of people haven't really picked up on. So you were writing about luxury and men's luxury, especially in the mid 1980s,
Yes.
when nobody else was doing it.
No.
And so you were, was it the Standard, and you were the youngest editor at the.
I was a very young section editor, section feature editor. I think I was 24, and they gave me something called London Life to look after.
Okay.
And one of the things actually we did, it included the wine column, and one of the things I instituted there was cigar and drink tastings as well.
Yeah.
So I was interested in these things. I mean, it was nothing more than personal interest, and also I quite liked the fact that nobody else was interested, and yet these things had once enjoyed great cultural currency. I mean, Savile Row was like a street of undertakers, you know, to gain entrance to whom you needed to have, you know, first, seconded, and sort of then be balloted as if you were allowed entry. I mean, there was a sort of, which I rather liked the fact that they had these little rails with curtains behind which you could see absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sort of much in the way that they sell tobacco products at airports these days, behind kind of smoked glass and so forth.
Yeah, but who educates you? Because you know, you can smoke, but you don't necessarily come to understand about Ligeros and Seco Lis and Medio Tiempo and Velada, and you don't really learn about these things just organically. People have to sort of point you in the direction of information.
I mean, I went to Cuba. I was very lucky. I went to Cuba first, I think, in 1995, and I met Edward. I mean, must have been 91 or something like this, I think, or 1990 even. I can't quite remember. So I'd had the best interest, and I knew Nick Freeman. He was a friend of my wife's stepfather, and Nick Freeman, father of Gemma, was the guy who basically consolidated all the Cuban cigar importing into one country, I think, into one company, and he was a great bon vivant, a huge character, and again made cigar smoking very attractive because he had that slightly sort of raffish quality of the 1960s about him, which I rather liked. And there was a sort of natural elegance about the man, but also a sort of sense of mischief. And also he was involved in the cigar business, so I thought, how bad can it be?
I guess so. Speaking of which, would you
Yes, I was
you
wondering
like
when you were going to ask.
This is the Cigar Keep humidor, and allow you a lucky dip.
Oh, I don't know. Is that the fourth? That's the 40 ring gauge, isn't it?
Yes.
Then I will try these, because I remember at the time of the launch of these were very, I mean, I'm always interested to see how they've worked out. The Sobresalientes there is a very good, I don't know if that's going to be, would the Sobresalientes be stronger or not?
I've always considered the Sobresalientes to be quite a light cigar.
And it has proved to be such, I always find. But then I'm interested as to how elegant these will be, because I had a Robusto Supremos the other night.
How was it?
And it was delicious. And I'm also, weirdly enough, I made my tasting notes on the telephone with sort of some sort of customary diligence. And then I looked back to the last one I had 6 months earlier, and the tasting notes were exactly the same.
Okay.
Or at least identifiably similar. So that was unusual.
What was interesting for me with the Robusto Supremos is that it kind of snuck up out of nowhere in terms of its sort of value.
Oh, no,
spike.
no. I mean, it was. I mean, also that helped by the fact that it was all over the place when it started.
Yes.
I just thought this is just such a mess, this cigar, in terms of flavour.
Yeah.
That I took my eye off the ball, and then suddenly it sort of was this sort of ultimate ugly duckling.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
turned into an entire
but
sort
then,
of.
because the Talisman kind of came out to London Fanfare because it was launched here, and I think that people for a second forgot about the Robusto Supremos, and so this became the sort of the kind of target of everyone's desires, despite the fact that. Well, there was more than one release of it.
Well, there was more than one release of it, and you could. I mean, but the joke was that when we were in Cuba one year, they were so plentiful that they would sort of. You could stop at a petrol station. If you actually bought some petrol, they would give you a box of talismans. I mean, we were just, and I had this with my friend Fabien. We went around all the cigar shops in the Costa del Sol, as many boxes of these as we could find. And now, of course, we're sitting on quite nice stocks because
That's good.
It was plentifully available, and now, of course, it's not.
And tell me about your sort of times in Cuba, because it's a sort of a mystical place for a lot of people. There's plenty of people who, on Cigar Keep, for example, that have never been, aren't sure what to expect, and you have seen it across the decades. You've seen the changes, but you've also been very much in the centre of the bed when it comes to news, luxury cigars, stuff that's coming up. I mean, we've spoken about that story of you having the denied cigar in your pocket.
Oh yes, that was one of the best. I think it was the original Bahique. And they were saying, well, we haven't quite decided on the blend yet, to which I sort of pulled out this cigar and I said, well, I was at the factory today, so you better let them know that you haven't worked it out, because they believe that this is the final blend. And then they had to kind of say, well, actually, you're quite right. Sorry, thank you for reminding me. But no, and I mean, there is, Cuba is, I love it. I mean, I'm always happy to go and I'm always happy to come back. So it's a perfect destination in that sense. Fascinating country. You can't help but feel sorry for the people there, and I don't like to, you know, I mean, I think that they have to undergo so much, and they undergo it with relative good humor, I suppose, because it's now they're sort of used to it. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing that they get anything made or done out there, to be honest, because of the sort of lack of almost any raw materials.
And you say
they had a shortage of string once stopped.
Oh yes, you sort of the string because of so it kind of messed up with the agriculture.
Yeah, there was no string, so that really did screw up the year's output.
It's funny because there's always talk about a shortage of medio tiempo, which means you don't get as many Bahiques, but sometimes it's something as rudimentary as string, isn't it?
Mm.
Which is has it always had that kind of dysfunctionality?
Mm-hmm.
And would you argue that that's part of the romance and the fun, or do you think this is, considering, and we'll come to the price hike, do you think that it's coming to a point where it's kind of not good enough for a country that's supposedly marketing a luxury good?
Very long question.
Thank you.
With many answers that I probably am not qualified to give. It is what it is the short answer. I mean, and you make of it what you will. I think a lot of it is, there's the story, I think it's the famous story of Chateau Bechevel, that it was popular in China because it had a dragon on the boat and therefore tasted better. And this is perfectly reasonable. I mean, why shouldn't it taste better if it's got a dragon on the front?
Sure. I quite agree.
Because it's you're psychologically conditioning yourself to actually expect something, and, you know, the psychosomatic sort of power of these things, or the psychosuggestive power of these things, is pretty high.
Well, it's no different to people think a Tom Ford suit must be good because it has a Tom Ford label on it. We can go into that if you want.
Perhaps not the example I'd have chosen myself, but let's stick with the dragon boat. I like the dragon boat. I like the dragon boat. That's sort of unanswerable.
But it's a branding thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what you mean, but also Tom Ford did. I mean, Tom Ford is a longer question. He did do something, not necessarily something that I would necessarily agree with, but he did affect some shift in things, you know. But Bechevel is sort of happened by accident, because it was knocking around obviously for sort of more than a couple of years, and then it was suddenly that it was discovered it was a dragon boat, and that's what's so good about it.
Yeah, so take it off. You were talking about how you were in the wine trade before. Could you sort of tell us a bit about the shifts in, obviously the wine has shifted enormously in terms of value over the years. There's been booms and stuff. Could you tell me about whether that's been something you've experienced with cigars, whether that's in terms of prices, but also people being interested in it?
When I joined the wine trade, which was very briefly in the mid-1980s, you did have the sort of timetable for some of the older firms was that somebody would roll in about 10, open the post, and then 11:30 it was time for sherry, then lunch, and then they would come back at about 4 in the afternoon, see if they'd had any calls, maybe dictate a letter or two, and then that would be it. So I think that it was a way of life. And then, like all these things, it became commoditized. Even as a luxury product. I mean, even when they sort of, some things are sufficiently plentiful for there to be a market, and for there to be a market that can price them to within a certain, on certain criteria in a certain way. So, I mean, whether it's a larger format of cigars, or whether you have a Picasso work on paper versus a Picasso canvas, or, so when you have enough of something for there to be a market, and not too much for it to be mainstream, but not small enough for it to be kind of totally recondite, which is what I like. I mean, I like things that people either don't know about or don't particularly like or care for. But when you have this sort of upper middle ground where you have something that is powerful and sought after, then when people applied the sort of, they took it out of the culture of it being just something that was done, and I'm no doubt romanticizing it here, but I felt that the wine trade that I came into was sort of still at the sort of fag end of the Dickensian kind of world of things. We did the Sancho Panza Sancho. I wrote about that once, a couple of times with great enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And then at the Bulgari, there were some overseas visitors who somehow cottoned onto this, and they'd all ordered these things, and they're like telegraph poles,
Yeah, yeah.
And they were sitting around the Bulgari smoking room in, tasting and testing lounge, and enjoying them or tasting them and testing them. And Gemma said that she had 999 years of stock, and then suddenly the stock list came right down to sort of, obviously sort of danger running out. And again, I like that sort of capricious thing that you're thrown onto things that you may not know about, and it sort of, Ruskin's essay on the Gothic, where he sort of talks about the Gothic sculptors having much more individuality compared to the classical sort of ordinariness. It's that kind of extra bit of sort of ornamentation and unexpectedness that I rather like. So I sort of rather cherish the fact that these things come about sometimes by design, but sometimes also by accident.
So remember when we spoke about the demise of Savareau a while ago, when I was writing something on it, and you said that the thing is that people have been talking about the demise of Savareau for a very long time. The recent price hike of cigars and the sort of the boom of cigars, is that as a sort of is that as much an inevitability as Savareau having tricky times, or is it coming? Does it go in cycles like that? Because as you said, there was in the 1990s where you had that first cigar boom. Now we're about to have a second one, which would be interesting to see how that turns out. I'd be fascinated to hear your thoughts.
Well, I don't know what killed the first cigar boom. I think it was obviously legislation in this country did a lot to restrict the enjoyment of cigars, and I certainly smoke many fewer cigars than I used to, and that is, I'm sure, better for me and my failing health. So, I must thank the responsible people in government for preserving my corporeal form. But I don't know. It's sort of it was going everywhere, and you couldn't. I remember going to Cuba in '99. I went once, and you couldn't buy anything in the shops. I mean, it was, and then I think they had a couple of bad harvests, and then I don't know. But there was a time when everybody, supermodels, were smoking cigars. Madonna was smoking cigars.
Yeah, Demi Moore.
Anybody, it was regarded as the kind of, I mean, it was still a tobacco product, but it was regarded as a sort of, as a sort of handbag or a wristwatch. It was a sort of something that you wore as much as enjoyed. This one I think is interesting because, again, you have people who weren't necessarily, certainly not smokers then, or cigar lovers, shall we say, like my son Max, who I used to take as a baby into Davidoff, and he grew up with the place, and some of his memories are of being on the beach in Marbella watching me smoke a cigar, and he still remembers when he saw his first Behique, and that was with me and my friend Fabian on the beach there. So, I mean, these things are part of his sort of cultural background. And what interests me is that, first of all, there are a lot of younger people coming into it. That is no longer the Cuban hegemony on these things. You don't have that. You have them because, first of all, you have a greater variety of so-called New World cigars, which is basically non-puros from outside Cuba.
Yep.
You have an increasingly mature cultivation of tobacco and cigar making culture in these places compared to what you did even 20 years ago. I remember when I first went to the Dominican Republic, and the first Davidoff factory was a barn with stamped earth floors. It's obviously moved on a bit since then, but that, I think, is what's interesting, is that people are prepared to look at they're interested in cigars as a thing rather than just Havana cigars. And They're younger. I mean, Shari is a sort of great. Our friend Shari Rahman is a great standard bearer for this sort of generation of, I think, cigar smokers, because he has great. He's a connoisseur, but it's not something that he sort of. He wears his connoisseurship very lightly, in that he knows what's good and what's bad, but he's not going to kind of give you a open university lecture on the subject.
Yes, he'll get out his cigar case and he'll give you a topaz, and then he'll take out his padron and smoke that and say nothing more, because that's what he prefers. But how does the Cuban cigar, well, how do Habanos sort of ride this particular wave of people shifting away and also contending with what looks like quite a significant price hike?
Well, I think what the luxury goods market has proved, and I think we're moving from cigars being a straightforward agricultural product. We've moved along. I mean, obviously, they've always been perceived as a luxury, but I think they are now becoming de facto members of that kind of luxury goods market, which is quite interesting, in that you have people coming in asking, Max says, for the BHK 56, not knowing what a BHK 56 is, but all they know is that they have to have it because it's a good thing.
Yes.
And I see that in other fields, as I'm sure you do as well. You've got people coming in not knowing what it is, but knowing that they want it badly.
Yes. Okay. So will there be a need, do you think, to to live up to the standards of what connoisseurs need, or do you think that they can go with, they can make continually plugged boxes of cigars because people don't care as much, because they're just, they, as you say, they just know they need to have.
No, I think that is always one of the issues. I mean, this is why when I told you about the Robusto Supremos that I had, that I was delighted that the tasting notes I'd made 6 months before for the last time I'd had that cigar were the same as the ones I had 2 days ago. So, I mean, I think that I notice an improvement, but it is, I mean, I think one cigar in a box that's plugged is still one too many,
Yes.
And I mean, I think that I would hope that that's something that they're going to address, but how successfully that can be addressed when you have a country like Cuba that is so perpetually short of what it needs in all areas, and I mean, they're highly intelligent, highly educated people, and in many ways brilliant people. I mean, individually you have individuals of considerable brilliance, and yet. And also in the research institutes, you have really fascinating people to talk to, and the people who the tasters, they know that. I mean, I've been to the interfactory tasting mornings and things like this. You have people who really, it's like watching, Roger Federer play tennis or something like this. You don't necessarily understand all of what's going on, but you understand the overall fact that you are in the presence of people who are giants in what they do, and also sufficiently humble to know that there is still more to learn.